There's a certain kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. It's a cold that starts in the pit of your stomach and spreads. Not like ice, but like a slow-moving anesthetic, numbing you from the inside out. It's the cold of absolute, undeniable wrongness. I'd never felt it until last August, on the side of a mountain half a world away from home. There were 4 of us. Me, Mark, Sarah, and Ben. We were a tight-knit group from college, bonded by a shared love for pushing our limits. We'd conquered trails in the Rockies, sweated through canyons in Utah, and navigated the misty peaks of the Appalachians. We thought we were invincible. We thought we knew mountains. That was our first mistake. Our grand post-graduation adventure was a trip to Japan. The centerpiece? Climbing Mount Fuji. For us, it wasn't about the spiritual pilgrimage or the sunrise vistas. It was about the challenge. And to prove that point, we arrogantly dismissed the popular, well-trodden Yoshida Trail. No, we chose the Fujinomiya Trail. The shortest route, yes, but also the steepest and most challenging. Go big or go home, Mark had said, and we all cheered. The foolish bravado of 22-year-olds who had never truly been humbled. The climb started just as we'd expected, grueling. The path wasn't dirt and pine needles like we were used to. It was a brutal, alien landscape of crushed volcanic rock, shades of rust red and charcoal black that crunched and slid under our boots with a sound like grinding teeth. The air grew thin faster than we'd anticipated, and each breath was a conscious effort. We started in the late afternoon, aiming to summit for the sunrise, the traditional Goraiko. For the first few hours, our spirits were high. Ben was cracking his usual terrible jokes. Sarah was meticulously documenting everything with her camera. And Mark was in his element, leading the charge. I was somewhere in the middle, just trying to find a rhythm, planting my trekking poles, taking a step, breathing. The mountain was immense, a silent, brooding giant that made us feel like insignificant fleas on its hide. The higher we got, the more the world below dissolved into a sea of clouds, isolating us completely. There was only the trail, the sky, and the 4 of us. We reached the 7th station as dusk began to bleed across the sky. The temperature was dropping fast. We layered up, our breath pluming in the thin, cold air. The trail was less crowded here. Just a few scattered groups of serious-looking climbers. The easygoing tourists had long since been filtered out. This is where the world began to tilt on its axis. We were pushing towards the 8th station, a string of headlamps bobbing in the darkness ahead and behind us. Mark was a few yards in front of me, a steady beacon. Sarah and Ben were just behind. The rhythm was hypnotic. Crunch, pull, breathe, crunch, pull, breathe. Then I saw it. Off to the right of the trail, maybe 60 feet away, was a light. It wasn't a headlamp. Headlamps are sharp, focused beams of white or yellow. This was a soft, gentle pulse of pearlescent light, like a trapped firefly the size of a fist. It glowed for a moment, then faded, then it glowed again. Curiosity is a powerful, stupid instinct. Hey guys, hold up, I called out. My voice sounded thin, stolen by the wind. I see something weird over there. Mark glanced back, his face barely visible in the glow of his lamp. Probably just a reflection. Man, let's keep moving. We're losing heat. He was right. I knew he was right. Standing still was a bad idea. But the light pulsed again. A soft, inviting beacon in the overwhelming darkness. It seemed to whisper, just a quick look. No one will know. I'll be right back, I said, my words nearly a lie before they even left my mouth. Just want to see what it is. I didn't wait for a reply. I stepped off the designated path. The ground here was different. Unstable, loose scree and larger. Jagged rocks that threatened to turn an ankle with every step. I kept my headlamp pointed at the ground, taking careful, deliberate steps towards where I'd seen the glow. The 60 feet felt like a mile. The wind howled in my ears. A mournful, empty sound that seemed to swallow all other noise. I reached the spot. The pulsing had stopped. My headlamp beam cut a frantic path through the darkness. Searching. There was nothing. Just more volcanic rock, twisted into grotesque shapes by the cold. I felt a surge of disappointment, followed by a wave of foolishness. Mark was right. It was probably just a reflection. My tired brain playing tricks on me. But as I turned to go back, my light caught something white nestled in a small hollow between two rocks. It wasn't a reflection. I leaned closer. It was a piece of clothing. A jacket, maybe. It was folded neatly, impossibly clean against the dark, gritty rock. It looked like a woman's white haori, a traditional Japanese jacket, the kind you might see in old movies. It was made of silk, cool and smooth to the touch even in the freezing air. There was no dust on it, no sign of having been exposed to the elements. It looked like it had been placed there only moments ago. A shiver, completely unrelated to the cold, traced a path down my spine. Who would leave this here? And why? It felt wrong, profoundly wrong. It was a piece of delicate, indoor life left in a place of brutal, outdoor survival. I didn't touch it again. I backed away slowly, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. The foolishness was gone, replaced by a primal sense of dread. I turned and scrambled back towards the trail, my boots slipping on the loose rock. Guys? I called out, my breath catching in my throat. Silence. The only answer was the keening of the wind. I reached the trail, panting, my headlamp beam swinging wildly up and down the path. It was empty. The bobbing lights of my friends, of any climbers, were gone. Mark, Sarah, I yelled, my voice cracking. Nothing. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. A knot of pure, undiluted panic tightened in my chest. I spun around, looking up the mountain, then down. The path was deserted in both directions. It was impossible. I had been gone for maybe 3 minutes. 4, tops. They couldn't have gotten that far ahead. And the group behind us should have been visible. But there was nothing. Just the oppressive, crushing blackness of the mountain and the indifferent stars above. The cold I mentioned earlier? This is when it began. That deep, internal frost. My sweat turned to ice against my skin. My brain raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe they took a short break just around the next switchback. Maybe I was disoriented. Altitude sickness. Yes, that had to be it. I was getting sick, confused. I had no choice. Going down was not an option. The only way out was up. I turned and started climbing. My earlier rhythm gone, replaced by a frantic, clumsy scramble. My lungs burned. Every muscle screamed. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the psychological terror that was now my constant companion. The mountain had changed, or maybe I had. The volcanic rocks, which had just been obstacles before, now seemed to take on sinister shapes in the periphery of my vision. I saw hunched shoulders, leering faces with empty eye sockets, twisted limbs frozen in agony. The wind was no longer just wind, it whispered. It coiled around my ears and murmured syllables that were almost words. Ancient and full of malice. I kept telling myself it was the altitude, the exhaustion, the fear. It had to be. Then I saw the lights again. Not the single, pearlescent glow, but several of them, scattered up the trail ahead. They looked like headlamps. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. It was another group. I wasn't alone. I pushed harder, fueled by a desperate need for human contact. I called out, but the wind snatched the words from my lips and hurled them into the void. As I got closer, I realized something was wrong with the lights. They weren't moving. They were stationary, dotted along the edges of the trail. And then I saw the people. Or what I thought were people. They were standing just off the path, motionless silhouettes against the starry sky. There were maybe a dozen of them, spaced apart. As my headlamp beam touched the first one, my blood ran cold. It was a figure, vaguely human in shape, but its edges were blurry, indistinct, like smoke struggling to hold its form. It was turned towards me, and it was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a wide, placid, utterly unnerving grin that stretched its face unnaturally. The eyes above the smile were dark pits, devoid of any light or emotion. It just stood there, watching me, smiling that terrible, empty smile. My breath hitched. I quickly averted my gaze and stumbled forward, my eyes fixed on the gravel at my feet. I could feel its gaze on me, cold and heavy. A few yards later, there was another one, same smoky form, same grotesque, placid smile. This one was slightly bowed, as if in mock politeness. I didn't dare shine my light directly on it, but I could see it in my periphery. They were all along the trail, Half-formed things. Part human, part shadow, part nightmare. None of them moved, none of them made a sound. They were a silent, smiling audience to my private hell. My mind screamed at me, altitude sickness. Hallucinations. Your brain is starved of oxygen. I clung to that thought like a drowning man to a splinter of wood. It was the only thing keeping me from curling into a ball and giving up. I kept climbing. My world shrunk to the 3 feet of trail illuminated by my lamp. I didn't look up. I didn't look to the sides. I just focused on the crunch of my boots. A sound that proved I was still real. Still moving. But I could feel them. I could feel their collective, silent amusement. The air was thick with it. With every step, I felt like I was wading through a swamp of pure despair. The smiling figures were the gatekeepers of this mountain. The silent wardens of a place that didn't want me there. They were feeding on my fear. And I was giving them a feast. My body was failing. My head throbbed with a skull-splitting headache. Nausea roiled in my stomach. I was dizzy, stumbling every few feet. I remember falling to my knees at one point, gasping for air that felt as thin as a ghost's whisper. I looked up, and one of the smilers was right there, just a few feet away, its form clearer than the others. I could see the faint outline of what looked like an old-fashioned kimono beneath its smoky transparency. Its smile was wider than the others, a rictus of terrifying joy. In that moment, I was sure I was going to die, that I would simply freeze to death on this cursed path, and my own smiling ghost would join the silent audience. That thought, the horror of becoming one of them, gave me a final, desperate surge of adrenaline. I pushed myself up, I put my head down and climbed. I don't know how long it was. Time had lost all meaning. It was an eternity of cold, pain, and the silent, smiling dread. And then, I saw it, the wooden torii gate that marks the summit. And beyond it, lights, real lights, the lights of the summit station. The hubbub of other climbers. The sound of human voices. Muffled by the wind but undeniably real. I broke into a clumsy, weeping run, stumbling through the gate like a man breaking the surface of the water after nearly drowning. I collapsed onto the crowded patch of ground, gasping, sobbing, the world spinning around me. And then I heard a familiar voice. "Whoa, dude, you all right?" I looked up. It was Mark. He was kneeling over me, a look of concern on his face. Behind him stood Sarah and Ben, sipping from thermoses. They looked tired, wind-burnt, but perfectly fine. Where did you go?" I gasped, my voice a ragged wreck. "I lost you. I was alone." Mark frowned, sharing a confused look with the others. "What are you talking about, man? We were with you the whole time." I stared at him, my mind refusing to process his words. No, you weren't. I went off the trail. I saw a light. I got lost. The trail was empty." Sarah knelt down beside Mark. "Alex, listen to me," she said, her voice calm and steady. "You've been right behind Mark the entire way. You haven't said a word for the last 2 hours. We just figured you were in the zone, concentrating, but you were there. We kept looking back." "Yeah, man," Ben added, his usual jokester tone gone, replaced by genuine worry. "You were like a machine, just marching. A little creepy, honestly. We tried to talk to you a couple of times, but you just stared straight ahead." The ground fell out from under me. The cold, which had begun to recede in the presence of my friends, came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. It was an absolute, soul-crushing cold that extinguished every last ember of warmth and relief. I looked at their faces, Mark's, Sarah's, Ben's. They were my friends. They were telling me their truth. But I knew my truth. I knew the terrifying isolation, the whispering wind, the impossible white jacket, and the silent, smiling figures that lined the path. I lived it. If I was alone on that trail, surrounded by those things, then what, exactly, had been walking with my friends for the last 2 hours? What was it that looked like me, walked like me, and followed them silently up the mountain while I was living through my own private nightmare? We watched the sunrise. It was beautiful, I guess. A spectacular explosion of color over a sea of clouds. Everyone else was cheering, taking pictures. I just sat there, shivering, staring at my own hands. I couldn't bring myself to look at my friends. I felt a chasm between us. A new and terrible distance that had nothing to do with physical space. The climb down was a quiet, tense affair. I kept looking at Mark, Sarah, and Ben, trying to see if they noticed anything different about me. But they just treated me like someone suffering from a bad case of altitude sickness. We left Japan the next day, but I never really left that mountain. A part of me is still there, on that dark, volcanic slope. Sometimes, when it's quiet and I'm about to fall asleep, I can still feel it. That deep, internal cold. I can see the empty trail stretching out before me. And in the darkness, on the edge of my vision, I can see them, the silent audience, and they're all smiling. I don't know what walked with my friends that night. I don't know what they saw when they looked back at the space where I was supposed to be. But the most terrifying question, the one that keeps me awake night after night, is this. When I stumbled through that final gate and collapsed at the summit. And the other thing, the thing that was wearing my face, disappeared. Did all of me come back? Or did we, somewhere in that freezing darkness, trade places?